Well, I was going to start today by telling a funeral story, and then I got here and Leslie Bassett was perusing the books out there and came across a wonderful book. It's a title I wish I'd thought of. Leslie, read that title. Stand and share that title with us, Leslie.
Being dead is no excuse. The official Southern Ladies Guide to Hosting the Perfect Funeral.
Being dead is no excuse. The official Southern Women's Guide to Hosting a Funeral. Being the perfect funeral. I love that title. Being dead is no excuse. That's right. So get up and get going. Oh, funerals. I remember when I was 6 years old, my great Uncle Fritz died. And I wanted to go to his funeral. Not because I was especially fond of him. I didn't know him very well. But because I'd never, up until that point in my life, seen a dead person except in the movies. My brother Glenn, the veteran of many funerals, had told me that sometimes dead people came back to life, sat up in their caskets, and chased people around the funeral home. He told me you had to drive a stake through their hearts to finish them off. Now, being 6 years old and innocent in the ways of the world, I believed him and begged my parents to let me attend Fritz's funeral. The 2 times I'd seen Fritz alive, he'd been sitting in his recliner watching television and barely moving. The notion of him rising out of his casket and chasing people around the funeral home intrigued me. I had to see that. But my mother said, funerals are no place for 6-year-olds, which made me think my brother was telling the truth. But now that I've officiated at several hundred funerals and have never seen anyone rise out of their casket and chase people around the funeral home, I'm starting to think my brother was lying to me. I remember a funeral I officiated at a number of years ago. A well-known woman in our town had died, and unbeknownst to me, when she had met with the funeral director to plan her service, she had said she wanted me to do it. And so I got a call from the funeral home, and I remember thinking to myself, well, boy, everyone knew this woman. This is going to be a big funeral. I'm going to have to wear a suit. So I put on my suit, and I went to the funeral home and got there early and sat and waited and waited and waited for the crowds to arrive. But when it was time to start the funeral, only 10 people were there. And that's when it occurred to me that there is a vast difference between being well-known and well-loved. We've been talking about depression and the habits we might cultivate to lessen not only the probability of depression, but to also lessen its effects on our lives. And we started by recognizing, and I'm going to affirm this every week because it's so important, that the first step to overcoming depression is to see your doctor in order to treat the biological causes of depression. I suspect that most depression is not behavioral, but biological in nature. Having said that, we readily acknowledge that there are certain habits, customs, practices that we can embrace to lessen the effects of depression. To that end, we've talked about the importance of facing reality, living in reality, of cultivating the habit of optimism and hope. And today I want to add to our list the importance of friendships, relationships, and their role in our well-being. Last year, I was speaking with a young man who I knew was struggling in life. In his upper 20s, it just seems to be the time in life that begins to when we start really deeply longing for life to be different. I asked this young man if he was happy, and he said no. So I asked him what it would take to make him happy. What would it take for you to be happy? And he said, I want to be rich, and I want to be famous. And he's not alone. A recent YouGov poll revealed that half of Americans want to be famous, and a majority of them are willing to sacrifice relationships in order to be famous. If given the chance, many of us would prefer to be well known than well loved. But statistically, they've actually done studies on this. We are literally more likely to win $1 million in the lottery than we are likely to become famous. Which means if our goal in life is to be famous, we will end up discouraged, disappointed, and depressed. We stake our happiness on the most improbable things. When I was a high school senior, I asked a classmate of mine on a date. She was a varsity cheerleader, homecoming queen. These were not the circles in which I ran, but I was smitten with this young woman. I was 5'11", weighed 110 pounds, and was president of the Spanish club. In other words, a real catch. I was talking with my dad about her. I said, I really want to go out with her. And he said, ask her out. You never know unless you ask. My father was always full of this pithy advice that always ended disastrously for me. Ask her out. You never know unless you ask. So I asked her out. It took a week of building up my courage, dialing her on the phone, and then slamming it down when her parents or brother would answer the phone. I didn't want to have to wait, and so I waited until she picked up the phone, and I asked her out on a date only to be shot down. It was like watching a newsreel from World War II, where the American Hellcats were shooting down Japanese Zeros. I went nose first right into the ocean. Oh, I was depressed. And then what happened? 3 years later, I shot up to 119 pounds, and I met Joanne. Each of us, at one time or another in our lives, has made our happiness contingent on improbable circumstances, be they fame, wealth, or romance. This has kept us from realizing a very real source of happiness available to all of us: our friendships. Our friendships. Listen to this. More than half of all Americans say that no one knows them well. This is regardless of age. More than half of us say no one knows me well. 44% of high school students today report persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. We are experiencing in our culture a crisis of connection when more and more people find themselves isolated, friendless, and disconnected from others. One cause, I think, of our isolation is our dependence upon technology to provide connection and entertainment. Our friends are on Facebook, and we now watch television shows about relationships rather than experience relationships ourselves. Isn't it telling that one of the most popular television shows of the past 20 years was called Friends, when half the people watching it didn't even have a friend. I asked a man this week if he liked his neighbors. He's lived in the same house for 23 years, and he said he didn't even know his neighbors. But he knew the names of every player on the 2016 Chicago Cubs roster, but didn't know his neighbors. Too often, we approach friendships the way we approach romance. We act as if relationships somehow depend upon magic, upon some mystical spark, upon lightning to strike, which either happens to us or it doesn't, but it's beyond our control. We act this way. Consequently, we view relationships as something that happens to us rather than something we deliberately cultivate. When the homecoming queen wouldn't date me, I moped around the house for a week or so, whining to my mother about how I'd never find anyone and no one liked me, until Mom, very uncharacteristically, when I came within striking distance, reached back her hand and slapped me right upside the back of my head. Now, my mother was a school principal, and she knew how to whack heads. Literally whacked me in the back of the head. I was shocked. She had never done that before. She said, "That's not how life works. If you want to find someone, you have to ask someone." Friendships, relationships aren't magic. They are the consequences of our determination to be connected to one another. Does it always work? No. Sometimes we get shot down. Sometimes friendships and relationships we thought would last forever come to painful ends. That too is a dimension of friendship. I was at a gathering of religious folks not long ago. This was an ecumenical event, people of different faiths, and we were discussing the books sacred to our faith. And someone commented about the Bible and said, "Well, since you're a Quaker, the Bible is probably the book central to your faith." And just the week before that, I had been to the library with my granddaughter Madeline, and while she was browsing through the books, picking out books she wanted, I picked up a copy from the Winnie the Pooh series and was just glancing through it. And in the library, reading that book, I thought, I'm a Winnie the Pooh man. So I said that to the lady who asked me if the Bible was central to my faith. I said, for a long time it was, but now I'm a Winnie the Pooh man. A.A. Milne wrote his own sort of gospel, which I appreciate more and more as I age. And what I read in the library that day was a beautiful scene from Milne's book, The House at Pooh Corner, when Piglet sidled up to Pooh from behind. "Pooh," he whispered. "Yes, Piglet?" "Nothing," Piglet said, taking Pooh's paw. "I just wanted to be sure of you. I just wanted to be sure of you." That is as wonderful a definition of friendship as I know. Someone we can be sure of. We don't ever stop needing that in our lives. No amount of money, no amount of power, no amount of fame even matters without having someone we can be sure of. When that happens, when that works out, our lives are infinitely and immeasurably more lovely. I pray this week that God makes it possible and that you make it possible in your life to have someone you can always be sure of. Life is hard, difficult, burdensome, and full of worry. We are saved, though, by one another. Burdens are lessened when shared with friends. Fears wither in the courage of accompaniment. And so, friends, we wish this for you this week, that you have someone you can depend upon, and that you make doubly certain you are someone who can be depended upon. This is our prayer this week. Oh God, to be useful and to be used. Amen. Turn to greet friends.